Imagine standing against the most powerful empire on Earth. An empire with the strongest army, the largest navy, and colonies spread across the globe. Now imagine that the people challenging this empire were not kings or professional soldiers, but farmers, merchants, craftsmen, and ordinary citizens. In 1776, a group of 13 small colonies dared to do exactly that. What began as a dispute over taxes would become one of the most important revolutions in human history. Against impossible odds, these colonies fought for freedom, independence, and the right to govern themselves. Their victory would create the United States of America and inspire freedom movements around the world. This is the incredible story of the American Revolution. More than 250 years ago, the eastern coast of North America was home to 13 British colonies. These settlements had been established over many decades by people seeking opportunity, religious freedom, land, and a better future. Although life was often difficult, the colonies gradually prospered. Farmers cultivated fertile land, merchants built thriving businesses, and growing cities like Boston, Philadelphia, and New York became important centers of trade. Despite being separated from Britain by thousands of miles of ocean, most colonists considered themselves loyal British subjects. They spoke English, followed British laws, and benefited from trade within the British Empire. For many years, the relationship between Britain and its American colonies remained relatively peaceful. However, everything changed after a major conflict known as the French and Indian War. Fought between 1754 and 1763, the war ended with a British victory over France. Britain gained vast territories in North America, but the triumph came at a tremendous financial cost. The British government was left with enormous debts and urgently needed new sources of revenue. British leaders believed that the American colonies should help pay for the war, arguing that British troops had protected colonial settlements during the conflict. To raise money, Parliament introduced a series of new taxes on the colonies. One of the most controversial measures was the Stamp Act of 1765, which required taxes to be paid on newspapers, legal documents, licenses, and many other printed materials. The colonists were furious. Their anger was not simply about money. They believed they were being taxed unfairly because they had no representatives in the British Parliament. This frustration gave rise to one of the most famous political slogans in history: "No taxation without representation." Across the colonies, resistance spread rapidly. Merchants organized boycotts against British goods, political activists held protests, and ordinary citizens increasingly questioned British authority. Although Britain eventually repealed some taxes, Parliament continued insisting on its right to govern the colonies. Instead of easing tensions, these actions deepened mistrust and resentment. The conflict escalated dramatically in 1773 when Parliament passed the Tea Act. The law granted special privileges to the British East India Company and reinforced Britain's authority to tax the colonies. Many colonists viewed the act as another example of government overreach. In Boston, resistance reached a breaking point. On the night of December 16, 1773, a group of colonists boarded British ships anchored in Boston Harbor. Disguised as Native Americans, they dumped 342 chests of tea into the water. The protest became known as the Boston Tea Party and remains one of the most iconic acts of defiance in American history. Britain reacted harshly. Determined to punish Massachusetts, the British government closed Boston Harbor, restricted local self-government, and increased its military presence in the colony. These measures became known among colonists as the Intolerable Acts. Rather than intimidating the colonies, the Intolerable Acts united them. Colonists who had once hoped for reconciliation with Britain began questioning whether peaceful solutions were still possible. Support for resistance spread throughout North America. In 1774, representatives from 12 colonies gathered in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. They discussed a coordinated response to British policies and called for a boycott of British goods. Although many still hoped to avoid war, both sides began preparing for the possibility of armed conflict. The moment that changed history arrived on April 19, 1775. British troops marched toward the towns of Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts, intending to seize colonial weapons and military supplies. Local militia forces confronted them. During the tense standoff, a shot was fired. To this day, no one knows who fired first. But once the shooting began, there was no turning back. The American Revolution had begun. News of the battles spread quickly across the colonies. Thousands of volunteers joined local militias, ready to fight against British rule. Soon afterward, representatives met at the Second Continental Congress and took a decisive step. His army lacked training, uniforms, weapons, ammunition, and supplies. Many soldiers had never fought in a major battle before. In contrast, the British Army was one of the most powerful and professional military forces in the world. Its soldiers were highly trained, well-equipped, and supported by the mighty Royal Navy. Most observers expected Britain to crush the rebellion quickly. Yet the colonists possessed strengths that could not be measured by weapons alone. As the war continued, support for complete independence grew stronger. One of the most influential voices was Thomas Paine, whose pamphlet Common Sense became a publishing sensation. Written in simple language that ordinary people could understand, it argued that independence was not only possible but necessary. Paine's words transformed public opinion. Increasing numbers of colonists came to believe that separation from Britain was the only path forward. On July 4, 1776, representatives of the colonies took a revolutionary step. The Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, primarily written by Thomas Jefferson. The document announced that the colonies were free and independent states. It proclaimed that all people possessed natural rights, and that governments derived their authority from the consent of the governed. The Declaration also accused King George III of violating colonial rights, and explained why independence was justified. The signing of the Declaration marked the birth of a new nation, but winning independence would require years of sacrifice and struggle. British forces launched major military campaigns and captured important cities, including New York. The Continental Army suffered defeats and often faced shortages of food, clothing, and ammunition. At several points, the revolution seemed on the verge of collapse. One of the darkest chapters came during the winter of 1777 and 1778 at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. Washington's soldiers endured freezing temperatures, hunger, disease, and severe shortages. Many lacked proper shoes and warm clothing. Despite these hardships, they refused to give up. Under the guidance of military trainer Baron von Steuben, the Army received intensive instruction that transformed it into a more disciplined and effective fighting force. Valley Forge became a symbol of perseverance, sacrifice, and determination. A major turning point arrived after the American victory at the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. The victory convinced France that the American cause had a real chance of success. For France, supporting the revolution offered an opportunity to weaken its longtime rival, Britain. In 1778, France officially entered the war and provided crucial assistance. French support included money, weapons, soldiers, military advisors, and naval forces. The alliance changed everything. The conflict was no longer simply a colonial rebellion. It had become a global war. Britain now faced challenges across multiple continents, while American forces gained access to desperately needed resources. French troops fought alongside American soldiers, and the French Navy challenged British dominance at sea. The decisive moment came in 1781. British General Charles Cornwallis established his army at Yorktown, Virginia. Recognizing an opportunity, American and French forces launched a coordinated campaign to trap him. While American and French armies surrounded Yorktown on land, the French Navy blocked British escape routes by sea. Cornwallis found himself completely cut off from reinforcements and supplies. For weeks, Allied forces bombarded British defenses. As conditions worsened, Cornwallis realized there was no hope of victory. On October 19, 1781, the British Army at Yorktown surrendered. The surrender effectively ended major fighting in North America and marked the beginning of the end for British hopes of defeating the Revolution. Although peace negotiations continued for nearly 2 years, the outcome was now clear. In 1783, Britain and the United States signed the Treaty of Paris. The treaty formally ended the war and recognized American independence. After 8 years of conflict, sacrifice, and uncertainty, the United States of America had secured its freedom. The victory stunned the world. A collection of colonies with limited resources had defeated one of the most powerful empires in history. Yet the American Revolution was about more than military success. It introduced ideas that would reshape the future. Concepts such as representative government, individual rights, constitutional rule, and popular sovereignty inspired political movements across Europe, Latin America, and beyond. Revolutions and independence movements around the world would draw inspiration from the American example. At the same time, the revolution contained significant contradictions. While the new nation celebrated liberty and equality, many people remained excluded from those ideals. Enslaved Africans, Native Americans, and women did not enjoy the same rights and freedoms as white male property owners. These unresolved issues would continue to shape American history for generations. Nevertheless, the American Revolution remains one of the most significant events in world history. It demonstrated that ordinary people could challenge powerful governments and determine their own future. What began as a dispute over taxes evolved into a struggle for independence that changed the political landscape of the world forever. From 13 colonies along the Atlantic coast emerged a nation that would become one of the most influential countries on Earth. More than 2 centuries later, the story of the American Revolution continues to remind us that powerful ideas, freedom, representation, and self-government, can change the course of history when people are willing to fight for them. The American Revolution was not just the birth of a nation. It was the beginning of an idea that would inspire the world.